Hi, welcome to Electric Lady Studio C. Come on in.
Tom, you have a remarkable roster of artists from Adele to Frank Ocean to Amy Winehouse to Lady Gaga to David Bowie. I mean, I'm going to leave out far more people than I'm going to mention, right? And you have 16 Grammys queued up there. You've won more Grammys in a single year than any engineer to date. People call you the mixer with the Midas touch, even though you mix on a Neve VR console. So I want you to go back to your roots in the UK and tell us a little bit about your humble path to the Platinum Road.
It's good to see you, Marek, and thanks for having me. Yeah, it's not obvious. I mean, it's 30 years for me now in studios, and I have to pinch myself that I'm still sort of managing to feed myself and, you know, those I love through music, which is always a surprise, and one has to be sort of grateful first. But I think I started like everyone else. Like, I really like music. Kind of wanted to be in a band once upon a time, and did this standard sort of teenage mirror test, you know, in my bedroom. And I was lucky that around the age of about 19, 20, some friends of mine got signed, got a record deal. Back then we were all into sort of early electronic music, so I'm talking Cubase and an Akai S950. They got signed, and I quickly realized I wasn't going to be the artist. Or by the age of 19, I had that realization, which was the most healthy realization I could have had. So post that feeling of like, I'm not going to be the artist in the equation, what other jobs are available? I was really fortunate from where I lived that the closest studios to me, and one of them was Psalm, which I didn't know at the time, but happened to be Trevor Horn's studio. And I literally wrote handwritten letters to the studios geographically closest to where I lived, because I'm extremely lazy.
I doubt that.
No, I am. I also think laziness is actually a quality in mixing engineers. You're looking for the fastest route from A to B. The longer you spend on it, the weaker the mix, the more diluted the idea, blah, blah, blah. I didn't know that then. It takes a minute to pick up a few tricks, but what I got at Psalm and working for Trevor Horn and the engineers he had was, you know, what I suppose you equate to like the Ivy League. You know, it was like a really, it was like a 2-3 year sort of hardcore brainwashing indoctrination into how records get made.
And so where'd you start? Obviously, you didn't start behind the console.
No, the system at Psalm, like I imagine most sort of big studios, was you'd answer the phone for about a year. You know, once they'd seen you on the phone, how you interacted with clients, how you interacted with other engineers. You know, after a period of about 18 months, if you survived, because the sort of cull rate was pretty high, off you went.
And your work hours were probably pretty extreme.
Yeah, I mean, again, like within this commercial facility, there were 5 rooms, and Trevor, being an active record producer at the time, sort of using quite a lot of them a lot of the time. But there are other clients as well. But there was no doubt that within that building, the pinnacle achievement was to get to work with Trevor, because it was excruciatingly hard. The hours were brutal. I think for about a year or two, I worked from 11 a.m. to 5 a.m., 6 days a week. And that's not for everyone. It just isn't. You got to remember, back then we're on tape, so everything. If Trevor asked us to take a half bar out of a song, that's a 5-6 hour bit of work, which is now shuffle.
And no margin for error.
Not really, no. I mean,
you cut the tape in the wrong place, you're doomed.
Well, on digital, you're different because you're bouncing. And obviously, by the time Trevor found digital and digital was available, he was all over it, because for the very reason you're saying, you know, if accidents happen, he didn't want that.
So you were on Mitsubishi machines?
We would be on a Sony 3348 slaving 3324s. So yeah, to do a half bar edit, you would have to bounce certain parts of tracks onto the 3324, offset them SMPTE with what was that gadget called? The blue thing?
Not the Russian Dragon.
Links. Links.
Yeah, something.
It's called links. Yeah, and you would have a click on each of your tape machines, and you'd phase it. And yeah, a half bar edit back in 92, 95 took about half a day. Yeah, so it was. I have to say, it was extremely detailed and sort of forensic in a way that it isn't now with the computer. At the same time, it's still, you know, there were no screens in the control room. You know, you're listening. It's a completely different world to where we are now. It's not better, it's just different.
What was, if you had like one takeaway from that experience, that time capsule, what was sort of your biggest takeaway that you probably use it today and don't even realize you do, but it's something that you've learned like a maxim along?
I think for me, the biggest highlight, once I'd got sort of what I call the mechanics of a control room down, and everyone has that, I don't know, light bulb moment where they start to understand the relationship between, you know, the patch bay, the board, the output of whatever is playing, you know.
Gain staging, input, output.
Yeah, you've got 4 or
flow.
5 ways, and we're going to get to it with the Manley because it's what I do all day, which is change the output of the Pro Tools into the board, the output of the board into the Manley. Everything's constantly sort of changing to sort of find that sweet spot, if you like. That's all it is. Knees, you know, this was built in what, late 70s, early 80s maybe?
80s.
Yeah, 80s. This is like an old steam train that you have to sort of get up to optimum steam level before it starts really, you know, delivering, if you like. Well, I think what I learned from Trevor is that when 90% of other record producers stopped a track, as in we're done, he was just getting going. And that shit blew my mind, like time and time again.
So then you made a transition from the UK to the US. How did you decide to come over here? What sort of motivated you?
Yeah, massive hit record. Pretty much, rolling in the deep. I think I'd been working out of Metropolis for 10 years. I'm a very sort of twitchy Gemini as a character, so I'm going to get bored of myself and pretty much my surroundings really quickly. I'm looking for the next idea or the next. And so when I started, you know, either repeating what I was doing in my workflow or repeating the same route to work, you know, drive to work, it was time to switch it up. And I'd started coming to the US to do some work here and there. Some producers were asking, you know, obviously a hit record is something that kind of opens the floodgates to new work.
Opportunity.
Yeah, opportunity. Yeah. And obviously I'd had that, the introduction to that was Rehab, an Amy's record, Back to Black. Mm-hmm. And with Adele in 21, everything just kicked up a notch. Cool. And suddenly the phone's ringing a bit more, you know?
And how did you meet Lee Foster and Electric Lady, and how did that relationship come to pass?
A good friend of mine, Mark Ronson, who I was obviously doing quite a lot of work for, I'd started to come over here and we worked out of a studio on Varick Street a bit. It was a hip-hop studio pretty much. So I'd started coming over to New York a bit, and when I'd finally made the decision to move here and work here, most people were telling me I should come and have a look at Electric Lady. And I'll be honest, as soon as I walked into this space 10 years ago now, it was like, you know, let's go.
Incredible. Yeah. 2012, a decade.
Yeah, and in Lee I found someone who's a sort of kindred spirit who, you know, was much more into, let's say, quality than quantity. You know, I felt we could do something here.
And that's when you reached out to me. I think it was Christmas Eve, and it's snowing, and you're like, it was like you had just gone to hook up your Manley variable mu and realized that
wasn't going to work.
It was the wrong voltage. Yeah. And you're like, I haven't mixed anything in 10 years without this thing. Help! You know, so I got one of my guys to.
And you did.
Yeah, run it over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate it.
My pleasure. A lot of great music came after that. So I was like, it's usually what I tell people is like, as long as you make some great music I can enjoy, I'll do pretty much anything.
Got you. Awesome. Yeah, it's been an incredible run.
So what I hear when I listen to your tracks that I find really enjoyable is there are specific producers like a CLA or a Jeff Lynne that have a very defined sound. So people go in because they know I'm going to come out with that sound on the other end. But when I listen to your records, I can't guess this is one of your records. Like I can guess very often that it's one of their records. They leave fingerprints, right?
Yeah.
And when I listen to your work, it's more like I hear something, I say, oh, that's gorgeous. What is that? Whatever, I have to go look. And then you've done it. And what it what I equate that to is kind of like an opening paragraph in John Steinbeck. He's gonna set up the stage for you. He's gonna set up the landscape, what you're seeing out there, everything that you're going to experience. So I feel like you set up, whether it's a jungle or it's a desert or it's an ocean or whatever you're setting up, you set up this place that always has space. Your mixes feel like they've got room in them. And I don't find you there. I find the space for the listener, me or whoever's listening, to come in and have the experience. So to me, it's a very different aesthetic than I find with other people's work, and it works across genres, because whatever you work with Lil Nas, you work with, then you go and you do a track with Lady Gaga for A Star Is Born or whatever. I mean, those are completely different worlds.
I mean, look, we're not one-dimensional people and beings. Like, until I was about 10 years old, my parents fed me classical music. So if you want to know my real love, it's Beethoven, Mozart, Bach, Mendelssohn, so I definitely have an affinity or a passion for orchestral work. I also enjoy watching films when I'm mixing records. I'm not listening to them, but I'm watching them. And I'll find generally that I'll try and find a film for an album. So I don't know, like you take a Jamie XX record, and I was watching, what was the film? Gravity. I watched Gravity for 2 weeks solid, all day, every day. Arcade Fire, I watched Pulp Fiction, I think. Like, I'll try and find something visual to help me. Yeah. Lawrence of Arabia was for another one, and it's the same principle for me in mixing, that you're going for, the same difference between shooting on an iPhone and shooting 35 mil. I'm playing with two fields, left and right, but there's vertical dimensions for me, which is sort of frequency, low end, high end, width, mono, stereo. All those things I'm going to use to manipulate the listener, the experience, or whatever. And then I'm not, I could be mixing a Kills record, and that's like 1, 2, 3, 4, go. And there's not much of a balance change. There's not much of a, say, scene shift. All the information you require to put you in scene is given to you immediately.
Okay, so how do you, as a producer or as an engineer, your job is to capture the artist's vision, to understand it, interpret it, right? So you have to interpret their vision, and then you have to translate it for the listener, for the me, for the whoever's. So how do you interpret that? How do you get that? Because a lot of people, like I said, you're going to come in as a rock band and you come out a country western band or whatever. You just go through their process, but that's not the case with you. You feel like you're a student, like you get their essence or something. So are you aware you're doing that? Is there a process?
Again, it goes back to that thing of like, I want a career that hopefully can continue. It's my 30th year in studios, and I think if I was too interested in time-stamping my ego onto a record, well, that's only going to last a period of time, isn't it? If I start using all the same effects and start using the same methods, and I put those on each act I work on, well, that again is going to timestamp stuff. Certain reverbs, certain plugins, I constantly ask people, I try not to use presets. 95% of other engineers are using them too. Again, you'll timestamp the work you're working on.
Yeah, it's a good point, and I applaud that the creative process doesn't end with being creative and writing a piece of art, which is originality. That's what makes art stand the test of time. It's not just the writing of the song that's original. It's the mixing of it. It's the presentation of it.
It's the presentation.
All of it, and that's got to be original as well.
Yeah.
So I applaud you for not reaching for the.
Obviously, like I said, it's natural that we are creatures of habit, humans, so we're going to repeat ourselves. Not only that, depending on who you work with, and I was lucky, I had a real broad spectrum of people to work from when I started, to learn from, Once you're in the chair, once you become the engineer, and by the way, when I was 24-5, I never thought it would happen. I didn't think I'd get off the phone to become an assistant. I didn't think I'd become an assistant or stay last. I didn't think I'd become the engineer. Now I'm mixing records, and yeah, it's not worn off on me. And I was watching Alan Rickman talk about taste, and taste is everything in this game, because it's everything else that's going on in your life that actually impacts what you do, you know, when you're staring at your computer screen or the board or whatever it is. It's not just the tricks that you pick up on YouTube and so on and so forth.
For sure.
It's what you're reading, it's what you're watching, it's what you're eating.
So you're putting yourself into this. You're putting the experiences that you have in utilizing those, drawing upon those to create.
Yeah, and also most importantly to align myself with what the artist and producer are trying to do. That's who I'm working for in you know, day to day.
So what's that process? How do you find? That's, I guess what I'm asking is, how do you get to the? So someone brings you the record to mix, and how do you understand what their vision is, that you're gonna, because you're translating it. You know, you could take a record and ruin it, and the public's not gonna ever like it or appreciate it or understand it, or right?
That happens. Yeah, that happens, and they don't use those mixes. I mean, again, we're human. Some days you're going to be better than other days. What you're trying to look for as a mixer, or you know, in this game, is consistency. So that, you know, a bit like going to your favorite restaurant. Why is it your favorite restaurant? Because time and time again they manage to produce something that you enjoy, right? You know, we all know one-hit wonders or whatever you want to call it. You're trying to avoid that, aren't you? You're trying to be quite consistent in your work, your output, and irrelevant of genre or irrelevant of background, you can sort of be sympathetic to what they're doing, and you're either helping them by, you know, maybe steering this thing a little bit in a different way, or you're just doing the best job of what, you know, or the best representation of what you're given.
Okay, so let's use a specific. So obviously you've worked with Adele's decade of work. Right. So how has that changed, you know, from 21 to 30? How is that, because sonically it's also changed, besides her writing, and everything's changed, but you've changed with it. You didn't just go, okay, here's the 21 formula, I'm going to stick that on the latest album. Well,
I mean, again, you've got to stay up to date. You got to be listening to what's going on out there. I have a really wide-ranging taste of music. I'm constantly able to draw on different influences and go, okay, Adele's now working with Inflow. She's making what I could call sort of, you know, I could reference 70s sort of Philly sound. I could reference, I don't know, there's all sorts of things going on, like English African church music, if you like, or Africans who've come to England, emigrated from the 60s, and are now making gospel music, but it's English gospel music. It's completely different to what's happening here. I'm familiar with this.
So that's your education. And you and I were talking about this earlier off camera about, you know, I call it the library of licks. So how you get, you're still a student of sound, right? You're going out there and you're listening to genres, and you're listening to, you've got your whole life to draw upon, and new things that are happening. You're bringing into your patina.
Yeah, I mean, this is the hardest thing, is to sort of stay current in your listening while making records. It's really hard. I'll be honest, most days I just don't want to listen to music outside of this room.
Of course.
I just don't.
Your tools are fried.
Yeah, at the same time, if you stop listening to what's going on outside of your own little cocoon bubble, you're going to be in trouble. It's not going to last. Or you're going to find, you know, that whoever you're working with, that's the only influence you have, which actually contradicting myself, could help. Yeah. So it's a weird sort of, it's a weird world where you're looking for as much influence as possible, outside influence, and at the same time you're sort of trusting your instincts, because half of this is confidence.
So do you have any specific you could give us between the breadth of those records where you made a conscious decision to go a different way, or take a song, approach it differently, or?
I mean, I guess, you know, Rehab's not a bad example. It was quite early on. It was before I even got to the States, and Mark had done something with the Dap Kings that was sort of incredibly, respectful to a sound that, you know, you could talk about Shangri-La, you could talk about that era of 60s sort of girl groups, Roxettes, if you like, almost slightly Phil Spector's production. again, I understood that. I knew I could sort of, I was familiar with what they were doing. I suppose what interested me is that that's been done. They did that back in the 70s and 60s. It was 2000, I believe, 6 when we mixed Rehab. And I started playing with something called Sound Replacer and adding, adding samples. The trick with that song was that the drums were recorded on one mic. There's one mic on Homer, on Rehab. So for us to generate the samples was actually quite hard work. It took a minute. But I suppose I don't think it's the only thing that's interesting about that record, because obviously Amy is the star, but is the sort of slight, if you like, dichotomy and the juxtaposition of a very traditional sounding 60s soul record with extremely contemporary drum samples, which immediately give it this sort of, I don't know, more contemporary head nod. I like that. I like where things are sort of fighting each other. It's generally where change and progress comes, right? And that record is a perfect example of that.
Beautiful. A track that jumps out to me is Lazarus from Bowie's Black Star record. That one, I think it's gorgeous. I use it as a test track for people, Anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, get Kevin Killen to record your music. I mean, there's not much I need to add, but I mean, Bowie's arguably one of the most fascinating artists to have occupied 5 decades, I think, of music. I feel fortunate that Bowie decided to do music. He could have probably entered any art form and excelled. Yeah, I mean, it happened very quickly, Black Star. Sort of 10 days in this room, and another little period of time later when we mixed a couple more songs. But Black Star was actually one where, I don't know, it's complicated. It's a really complex record to listen to now for me. It's some of the more, how to say, like, I want to call it reckless mixing that I've done. They're slightly out there. The effects are extremely first-passy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
There's some really odd echoes that happen just off the fly, and swells, if you like. At the same time, like, I was really conscious of keeping, the guts of what they'd done and being respectful.
You must have felt a lot of responsibility because, I mean, no one knew that this would be his last record necessarily, right. But people also kind of knew this might be his last record. Right. So there must have been, I mean, how did that affect your approach?
It didn't. I think if I'd allowed, who I'm working with to sort of distract me from the process of mixing, we wouldn't be sitting here today. It's not so much that, I'm not starstruck by working with someone like David Bowie like I was, but at the same time, once you get your hands on the music, off you go. And David was just like all great artists, he was like, just go for it, enjoy yourself, have fun, do what you do. And when someone like that tells you that, you do.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah, it was really beautiful. He's a smart guy.
What about, Beck Sea Change is another iconic record that...
I didn't mix that.
Oh, you didn't mix that?
No, I mixed Morning Phase.
Sorry, that's what I meant.
Godrich mixed that.
Sorry, Morning Phase.
By the way, I use Sea Change as a reference one as well. So
okay.
Nigel Godrich. Again, Beck, that's a pretty mad one. But when I met Beck before I started working on Morning Phase, he was out of a record deal at that time. He was coming back from, I think he'd had an injury, filming a video. He wasn't where I imagined Beck would be, which is sort of, hipster in LA, killing it. That wasn't the guy I met. And I think that record represents quite a lot of that. The first song he played me was Wave, which is just him singing with an orchestral background, and the strings are all arranged by his father. So it felt already pretty personal, pretty intimate. And then, you've got James Gatson playing drums, you've got Joey Waronker. This is an all-star cast. The snare on half that record was a snare that James Brown gave to James Gatson. Everything's, it was recorded by Daryl Thorpe, and if I had 2 recording engineers that I would big up, it's Daryl Thorpe and Kevin Killen, who did Black Star. These are great, great recording engineers who've been in studios longer than I have. everything in that environment is set up for it to work. There was no fat on those sort of multi-tracks. Yeah, I could go on a bit about Morning Phase.
Man, but so I mean, it goes back to what I was saying about you building these landscapes and
Well, I'm being told, I'm being given information. Morning Phase was all about, the first song again was called Wave. So it's all about the ocean, isn't it? It's this undulating sort of, that's what I'm going to go for. I'm going to achieve that with lots of things. My theory quickly on Morning Phase was keep the drums completely dry and then let everything else swim. Then you'll have this quite close, intimate feeling of drums, and everything else can happen around it. But yeah, I like to get into the theme, you know?
Yeah.
And I think, to call albums concept albums sometimes is a stretch, but there's usually an underlying theme in what an artist is doing and trying to, get over. I'm just going to look for it.
I mean, you give records, from someone who grew up with records, you give that brick of songs, you make it feel like a record. You give it a cohesiveness that is a record. Like this is a time capsule. This is something that happened at this place. It's not like I could take this song and throw it onto a different record by the artist and I wouldn't know. It's like, no, that doesn't fit. It's like, I wait, this all goes together.
Yeah, I think that's the hardest thing, and that's why, sometimes mixing, like I'll talk about mixing quite quickly. You're really trying to capture this moment you're talking about. Quite often, as we all know, once you've recorded something, we become sort of fatigued by it, or it becomes, through overplaying and over-listening, you stop thinking creatively. We naturally become quite conservative in sort of our actions. What I'm trying to do when I walk in here is just get to it really quickly and then step aside and not overthink it, not overdo it. Try and go back to those first moments because obviously I recorded stuff back in the day, but that feeling of the first day of tracking. Like when you set up, everyone's off and you've got this extremely exciting moment where something is happening. You're not quite sure what, you're not quite sure how or why, but it is, and you just go with it.
And part of that dynamic about spontaneity you talk about, and about getting somewhere, how does tying Manley Variable Mu into your your career, what place does that fit? Again, across all these different Adele records, but it's still there, even though those records are very different, even though a Beck record is different than the Bowie record, but it's there. How does that have a place in all of that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I don't know, but it does. I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier in work, and what we're looking for is consistency. The constant in my life has been my mix bus, and I've got enough tools now between the console, the computer, and my mix bus that I know what I can use it for, or how it can help me. If you're using a Manley, you're aware of its characteristics, especially the variable, the MU. It could be thought of as quite soft, if you like, or receptive to sort of, quite a musical compressor, limiter. I found it to be quite sort of, it can be quite exciting at times. You can do quite a lot with it. But I know where I'm going to go for it. I know where it's going to help me.
Give us an example of where it would help you.
I mix, I suppose, sort of, my mix is a vocal-led. I gravitate towards singers and voices. That's my personal taste.
It shows.
I like songs.
I appreciate it.
Right, and I like melody, so I'm drawn to those things at first. So the loudest thing on my records is usually the vocal. Again, like watching people like Al Schmidt work back in the day, Bruce Swedien, those guys pushed into compressors a little bit with the vocal. It's quite an old school sort of way of thinking, but essentially when the vocal stops singing, the compressor goes, calms down, and the music comes up. I like thinking of it like that, and I still pretty much work with that methodology, if you like. A voice like Adele's, once you take that out of the mix, or once that comes out in certain sections, you know, you want something that's going to help you bring back the level, if that makes sense.
And so do you drive into Verimue at different times? You push it differently, or you're set and forget? Once it's on there, it's there.
No, throughout the course of a mix, and a mix for me is usually, you know, a day on a song. It depends, but there'll be constant little fiddlings, you know, tweaking between the console, the you know, the 2-track bus, if you like, the output of Pro Tools, so that, you know, again, it's a piece of equipment that, you know, the Manley's been with me for 20 years. I don't know, probably. I know what it's going to do, and I know what it's not going to do. I know when I go to flick it in, the computer's going to cut. Like, there's this sort of chain of events that happens.
So what's that chain? When do you go flick the switch? Approximately. I know you know.
So like, it takes me about an hour or half an hour or so to get a balance of everything. First day. This is on a multi-track I may never have heard in my life before, like today. It's the same sort of mentality as when I'm going to turn the automation on the console. It's like, there's something I want to do that I can't do unless I do this, right? At that point, my brain flicks from balance to, okay, now we're doing other things. I'm not going to start sort of EQing the hi-hat by itself. I'm going to go straight to the 2-track and put that on everything. Then if I've got issues, I'll go and look at them independently.
Got it. What do you lean on what do you expect to get from the variable mu?
I expect to get, if I'm feeling like there's a huge drop, say, after the first chorus, or if there's this sort of sense of like all this information coming and then, yeah, it feels a bit flat, sort of continuing, I'm gonna need some help, and that's where the MU will help me. Is if I get my gain staging right, if you like, which is, you know, call it balance, call it what you want, but these things are now much more habitual, intrinsic, they're sort of done in the subconscious rather than, but I'm gonna go there for sort of backup. The Manley provides backup for me in that sense. Yeah.
Awesome. So your mixes, to me, I would use the adjective, are opulent. They have opulence to them. And I mean that by a richness in the fact that I close my eyes, I can see something, it makes me feel something emotionally, it moves me, right? And again, this is cross-genre, so you're working in different territories. Mm-hmm. Even across artists, like we said, over the time period with Adele, things have changed. So is there something that you would attribute that quality to? Yeah, how did you arrive here? You know?
I like nice things. I like nice smells, I like furniture, I like design. I'm interested in all of it. I'll inform myself by having visual information while I'm mixing. Suddenly, if that visual information and the audio information start colliding, or I'm going to have more ideas, right? I'm constantly, if you like, looking to have to be excited, for it to be playful. Again, after 30 years in studios, you've got the nuts and bolts out the way, so you're trying to come into this space and add value. Value may be the wrong word in terms of like, it's not monetary, but justify your existence maybe. The worst thing you can do as a mixer, I think, is sort of insert yourself into a project and not add anything. So I'm super hesitant about jumping into projects, first of all, and I'm really careful that if I do jump in, I'm going to contribute. So
how do you select obviously you get more submissions than you pick jobs, so how do you make a choice like that?
I guess you know, experience is huge in this. In that, after a while, you're trying to make an educated guess that if someone plays you a song, a mix, or whatever, you very quickly. I try and get back to people quick. You know, time is everything in our game. But you're trying to work out if the rough mix that you're being played is a brilliant version of what's on tape, or there's more. There's more available. If sometimes I'm confused by that, I'll say, "Can I see the parts? Can I have a look at the parts before I even say yes or no?" In that, like, what's happening in the rough mix the best version possible of what's on tape? And if I feel there's another angle, I'm gonna, yeah, I could help you here.
So do you get trapped by the rough mix sometimes,
Of course.
where people are married to it and they can't kind of get away from it, and you're just trying to polish the rough mix, or?
I mean, I'd be lying if I said in the world of sort of, mega maximizers and mega limiters that sometimes things come in where there's, 0.5 of a luff that's left for me. That's not mad fun for me. It's just not. But I'd be lying if I said that doesn't happen. The huge change that happened, I suppose, seismic change, was that the standalone record producer doesn't really exist anymore. The record producer is now the writer, quite often, or co-writer. That means that right at the beginning of the process, the writing, before the song has even been, given the green light to appear on an album, the producer's got the level to a place that's too loud for broadcast, right? This is fact. So where do you go? I've got to then find within all that more, or more level's the wrong word, but sort of I've got to bring something to the table, and it's not going to be level. It's complex and it's different each time, and sometimes I can't achieve sort of more level, but maybe I can bring the vocal to the fore, and that's probably where my experience is useful to an artist or to a producer.
So tell us about an artist that you're working with right now that we might not know as well, or maybe is up and coming, that you're excited about.
Yeah, okay, so I'm really excited about this new little Yachty record that we mixed here, called Let's Start Here. He's a fascinating artist to me. He's a 25-year-old Atlanta, native, and obviously hip-hop sort of is his background, and with this record he's decided he wants to work with musicians and people playing things. So he worked with a whole bunch of different producers, and has essentially made a pretty sort of psychedelic guitar record. And it's going to be really interesting to see how it's received, both by the hip hop community and I guess his own fans and the rest of the world at large. It's definitely a left turn. That's definitely where I'm going to lean to with artists that are more original, and you could call it, they're braver, aren't they? They're sort of willing to sort of push the envelope, if you like, or go to the edge of what's possible within a certain genre. I think, the biggest change for me coming from England to the States is how sort of genre-tied you can become as an artist here. In England, both sort of in the technical side as engineers, we're a little bit more 360 in our sort of involvement. Because you engineer rock records, it doesn't mean you can't engineer a hip-hop record or produce it or whatever your role is. So I never came into this or any record I work on with I'm this kind of engineer. I'm not. I'm just here to help you do what you're doing. It was really interesting to be able to help a hip-hop artist and the producers he was working with, find this sound that they were looking for. I love that. That's exploration, if you like, And I think the sort of homogenization of music by streaming services or by what sort of, quite narrow, stringent radio, what they'll playlist and so on. I'm much more interested in artists who just concentrate on songs and what they're doing. And then how that translates afterwards is a mystery,
It's almost hard to break out of, everything's fed for you now. So you're on Google and they're feeding you news because they know what you like. You're on Tidal, hopefully not Spotify, because they pay better and sound better. And so you're on Tidal and they're trying to feed things up to you. It's like, stop feeding me stuff. I wanna go explore. It's hard to get out of your own thing now.
Yeah, I use Go to Track Radio, right?
Yep.
And I find pretty much 3 songs in, the algorithm's whack.
Absolutely.
It's gone.
It's absolutely out of its mind.
Yes. Yeah.
So Apple was much better when you had your iTunes collection and you'd say, shuffle my library to a song. It was actually pretty good at it back then.
Again, that's you've done that's user, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've done the input. I mean, AI is obviously still in its infancy. Ironically, Yachty's album cover art has been done with AI art. I'm having conversations with people in my industry about AI and about how, the technology is going to be influenced by artificial intelligence. at the moment, I would just probably stick to the word artificial because there doesn't seem to be masses of intelligence showing in these algorithms. But there's no doubt they'll get better. Yeah, I think the human touch is always going to be, you know,
Important.
yeah.
Brother, thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me. The stories affect me personally. I know they're going to affect everybody who watches this. And I'm looking forward to checking out this track from Emily King this year with the Manley Verbal Mew next.
Okay, that's that.